Hi class. In this video we're going to look at a problem that's very similar to P7-19. So I've created a template for us to look at. It says Jackson County Senior Services is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing essential services to seniors who live in their own homes within the Jackson County area. 3 services are provided, and those are home nursing, Meals on Wheels, and housekeeping, and then we have some data that were given. And then it says that Judith Miyama is concerned about the organization's finances and considers the net operating income of $37,200 last year to be razor thin. She feels the organization should be building its financial reserves at a more rapid rate in order to prepare for the next inevitable recession. So she's looking for more information. And it also says the depreciation in housekeeping is for a small van that's used to carry the housekeepers and their equipment from job to job. If the program were discontinued, the van would be donated to a charitable organization. We also are told that none of the general administrative overhead would be avoided if the housekeeping program were dropped, but the liability and salary of the program administrator would be avoided. So in our chart, we have several different categories of expenses, and in our instructions we're told which ones of those could be avoided if administration decided to actually get rid of the housekeeping segment. So all that being said, requirement 1 says, what is the impact on net operating income by discontinuing the housekeeping program? I'm missing a space. We fix that. So I've created a chart that we're just going to kind of fill in and work through till we can figure out the answer to this question. So we've got revenues and expenses that we're going to be looking at, and we're going to look at the total of everything that we have right now of all 3 segments, and then we're going to look at totals if we pull out that housekeeping segment, because that's the one that they're considering dropping. So up here in our current total are revenues, $930,000. And that's given actually in the instructions. In fact, I think all of these are just going to carry straight down. So our variable expenses are $480,000, which means our contribution margin is our revenue less our variable expenses is $450,000. Then we've got some fixed expenses, $69,000 for depreciation. Liability insurance was $43,700. Program administrator salaries $114,100. $186,000 for general administrative overhead. We're going to add those up, and that will give us our total fixed expenses of $412,800, and that we can calculate our net operating income or loss. So to do that, we'll take our contribution margin less those fixed expenses, and we have a net operating income of $37,200. All right, so all of that we're just going to fill in straight from the information that we're given. The next thing we're going to do is to figure out what these totals would be if housekeeping was actually dropped. So we're going to have to do some calculations to do that. So in our revenues, we have $930,000 in revenues total, and that $930,000 is made up of revenues from home nursing, Meals on Wheels, and housekeeping. So if we take out the $252,000 from housekeeping, we're actually left with revenues of $678,000. Our variable expenses, again, we have $480,000 in total variable expenses. If we take out $153,000 from housekeeping, gives us $327,000 in variable expenses. And after we do those two, we can come up with our contribution margin, which is $351,000. It's just our revenues less our variable expenses. And then we're going to work on our depreciation. So this is where it gets a little tricky. Let's see. there was something about the depreciation on the, okay. The depreciation in housekeeping is for a small van that's used to carry the housekeepers and their equipment. If the program were discontinued, the van would be donated. So it's my understanding of this is that the depreciation has to do with that van, and they have that van because they have housekeeping services. So if they get rid of that, if they get rid of the van, they'll also be rid of the depreciation. So $69,000 is going to be avoided in depreciation because they're not going to actually own that van anymore. All right, let's see what it says about liability insurance. Here it is. The liability insurance and the salary of the program administrator would be avoided, but only for housekeeping. So if we get rid of the housekeeping, we're talking about our liability insurance. So we have $43,700 in liability insurance in total. If we drop the housekeeping, then we're going to get rid of $15,800 of that $43,700, which gives us a total of $27,900 that's left in liability insurance. So that's the liability insurance that we would have for Meals on Wheels and nursing homes. So if we drop our housekeeping, our liability insurance will actually be just $27,900. And then we've got program administrator salaries, total of $114,100. If we were to drop the housekeeping portion of that, which was $35,200, we would be left with the $40,400 for the nursing home and the $38,500 from Meals on Wheels, which totals to $78,900. General and administrative overhead says none of the general administrative overhead would be avoided if the housekeeping program were dropped. So we actually have some allocated to housekeeping, but if we drop housekeeping, they're just going to move those costs over to some other areas. It says they can't really avoid those costs. So that $186,000 total general administrative overhead is going to still be $186,000 because we really can't avoid any of that. So we can add up our total fixed expenses. And then our net operating income or loss, we can do that just like we did before, which is your contribution margin less your fixed expenses. So if we drop the housekeeping, we'll actually have a net operating loss of $10,800. So the difference in all of these is just the current total less the housekeeping total. And actually that should be a decrease. Let me try that again. Our revenues will go down $252,000. And our expenses are going to go down, which gives us, whoops, oh, why is it doing that? Gives us a $99,000 negative contribution margin. And then our depreciation was no change in that. Our liability insurance actually decreased. Our program administrative salaries decreased, and there was no change in our general administrative overhead. So our total fixed cost were $51,000. So our net operating income or loss would be the $99,000. Whoops. So we have a contribution margin of $99,000. Our total fixed expenses actually decreased by $51,000. So that's going to help our contribution margin come out of the hole a little bit because we decreased our fixed expenses. So we actually end up with a net operating loss of $48,000. And you can see how that adds across either way. Should housekeeping program be discontinued? Well, we can look at our chart and decide. Right now, we have a net operating income of $37,200. If we drop the housekeeping segment, we'll actually have a net operating loss of $10,800. So we're going to actually be worse off by dropping that housekeeping segment than we would if we continued to operate that housekeeping segment. And that's kind of where sometimes you're better off to operate something that's really not a big income generator. And the reason is because even if a program's not generating a lot of income, it could still be generating enough income and carrying part of the burden of those fixed costs. So the more segments, in other words, that we have in this company, the more segments we can spread those fixed costs across. So up here we have 3 segments, the home nursing, the Meals on Wheels, and the housekeeping. And down here, a lot of these fixed expenses are not going to change whether we just have 1 segment or 2 segments or 3 segments. So we may be better off to keep all 3 segments, even though, like for this one, it looks like housekeeping is actually losing money. But it has a positive contribution margin. So it actually, after we pay the variable expenses for housekeeping, we have $99,000 left that we can use to help cover some of those fixed expenses. And since those fixed expenses aren't going to all go away, proportionately, if we get rid of housekeeping, we're actually better off to keep housekeeping even out operating at an operating loss, because it's still picking up enough money to cover part of those fixed expenses. So that's not always the case, but sometimes it is. Sometimes you're better off to keep those different segments if they are contributing to the cost of fixed expenses some. You may be better to eat any loss that is attributed to that segment, because if you take away some of these expenses, you also take away that revenue, and so sometimes it kind of cancels the benefit out. So there's requirement 1. It says, what's the impact of net operating income? Well, actually, we went from a $37,200 net income to a $10,800 loss, which is a total swing of $48,000 in the wrong direction. So should housekeeping be discontinued? No, it should not, because you're actually going to be worse off than you were keeping it. All right, let's see what else it asks. It says, prepare a segmented income statement. And so let's see up here. Most of this information is going to come from this chart. So our revenues are given up here, $270,408 and $252. So let's type those in. And then, of course, the total would be across $930,000. Variable expenses, again, are given up here in the chart. So we're just going to carry those down. So as long as you have this format to go by, you shouldn't have any problem. And we're going to total those. And then our contribution margin is going to be our revenue less those variable expenses. I'm going to copy that all the way across. And then we've got our traceable fixed expenses. So let's look. We've got three types of fixed expenses: depreciation, liability, and program administrative salaries. And all of those, it looks like, are given up here in the chart. So we're going to just take these numbers here and copy them straight down. Depreciation is $8,200 for nursing home, $40,300 for Meals on Wheels, and $20,500 for housekeeping. And total those across. Liability, same thing. We're just taking those from that chart above. And we're going to total that one across. And program administrative salaries, $40,400 from the chart above, $38,500 and $35,200. Going to total that one. And we're going to total all three of those fixed expenses in each of the columns. So then we can calculate our program segment margins. So to do that, we're going to take our contribution margin. We're going to subtract out those traceable expenses, and that's going to be our program segment margins. And I'm going to cheat and just copy those all the way over. And in this format, we're going to actually break out that general administrative overhead separately because it's not a traceable expense. So up here we've got each segment, the revenues associated specifically with those segments, and the traceable fixed expenses associated with those segments, and the variable expenses associated with each of those segments. So those are things that we can tie specifically to those segments. It said in our instructions that general administrative overhead is just more of an overall expense that would be avoided. So we're going to take that $186,000 and put it down here all together because it's not a traceable expense. And then we can calculate our net operating income or loss. We're going to do that by taking our total program segment margin, subtracting out that general administrative overhead expense, and that gives us net operating income of $37,200. So then it says, would a segmented income statement format be more useful to management in assessing the long-run financial viability of the various services? And I'm going to say yes. Oops. Yeah, yes. Yes, I'd say so. So this is the format we're advocating for. And the reason for that is because it gives us a sense of how these different segments are operating based on the revenues and expenses that can be directly tied to them. So that general administrative overhead is an overall expense. It's not tied to any of those. So we kind of take it out here. We take it out of the picture. So then we can actually look at these program segment margins and really get a better sense of how those segments are operating based on those controllable or traceable costs that they have, rather than kind of muddying the water with those general administrative overhead expenses. And then I think that looks like the last part of that question. So that's basically the format that you're going to use to do P7-19 on your homework. I don't think there's anything else tricky in that, so hopefully this was helpful.